All right, guys. So the other day, Lula da Silva won the presidential election in Brazil. He won by about 2 percentage points, which is about 2 million votes. And for the next 48 hours, everybody was on pins and needles because Jair Bolsonaro, now the former president, he had said previously, like, I'm going to contest it if I lose. Like, I'm not, like, basically, like, I'm not accepting a loss, and I'm going to do a full Donald Trump move and say it's rigged. And so for 48 hours, the reports were he went in his room, closed the door, and was by himself. Now, I actually sort of low-key respect that, because that's exactly how I would react if I lost a presidential election. I'm like, I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to see anybody. Let me go sulk in my room. So he did that, but everybody was waiting like, oh, fuck. What's he going to say? What's he going to do? This dude is insane. You know, he has quotes like, I'm in favor of a dictatorship. And so you look at that and you're like, oh boy, buckle up. You know, if you listen to his previous comments, he was going to go all in on a rigged election type deal. Okay, so now we get this. Brazil's Jair Bolsonaro finally speaks, but doesn't accept election defeat. The far-right leader broke his nearly 48 hours of tense silence since Sunday's defeat, but said little beyond that he'd, quote, respect the Constitution. Huh. All right, so here's what they say. This is in Huffington Post. On Tuesday, or should I say HuffPost. They changed the name of it not too long ago. Anyway, on Tuesday, far-right Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro finally acknowledged his Sunday election defeat to leftist Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, breaking his nearly 48 hours of tense silence since the results were confirmed. Bolsonaro spoke briefly for about 90 seconds in total at the Brazilian presidential palace and did not expressly accept the election results. Neither did he mention da Silva, who won the race by about 2 million votes or 2 percentage points. Instead, he said only that he would continue to fulfill the Constitution. His chief of staff, Ciro Nogueira, followed by telling reporters that transition proceedings would begin immediately. Whether the right-wing leader would accept defeat has always been far from assured. Bolsonaro has spent the last 2 years, spreading conspiracy theories about voter fraud and attacking Brazil's election system in an effort to undermine his potential defeat. While many world leaders, including U.S. President Joe Biden and Bolsonaro allies, were quick to recognize the result, Bolsonaro himself remained totally silent, sparking concerns that he would try to contest the results. And while his chief communication officer suggested Monday that Bolsonaro would not contest the results, the president's failure to acknowledge the election allowed uncertainty to fester and at least some chaos to break out in Brazil. So, look, ultimately, why did he, half back off of the pulling a full Trump? I think one of the reasons, honestly, is that Joe Biden immediately came out with a statement and congratulated Lula and sent a sign to the elite in Brazil, like, don't try any funny shit. Do not try any funny shit. And when the imperial power in your backyard says, hey, dog, we got our eye on you, well, that sort of changes the scope of things. All right, they continue here and say, since Sunday evening, pro-Bolsonaro truckers have blockaded hundreds of highways and roads in at least 23 Brazilian states in protest of the results. Some of the truckers, a group that has broadly aligned itself with Bolsonaro throughout his presidency, called for military intervention and burned tires to shut down major highways. Protesters on Monday blocked access to Sao Paulo's international airport, causing chaos, flight delays, and even cancellations that lingered into Tuesday morning. Brazil's Supreme Court on Monday ordered the Federal Highway Police, which is closely aligned with Bolsonaro and had refused to break up many of the blockades, to put an end to the protest and threatened heavy fines to truckers who persisted. The court accused the Highway Police of omission and inertia in allowing the protest to continue. So the reason why this is really interesting to me is because, and I talked about this beforehand too, you actually have different factions of the Brazilian elite who have, varying opinions on what happened here. So the Supreme Court is siding with Lula. You have the Federal Highway Police siding with Bolsonaro. I'm sure when you get to, other police, they have a take on it. When you get to the military, they have a take on it. And it's a very factionalized type deal. So now you got to remember, Lula was president for a long time already in Brazil. And when he was president, he was wildly successful and he was beloved by the country. We're talking, he grew the middle class of the country from about 50% to 73%. Okay? So this is a guy who delivered for the people. And, my theory of politics is you deliver for them, they'll deliver for you, right? So this is a guy who has a lot of support. Now, Bolsonaro was not a very successful president, but he still has some in some elite corners in Brazil, he still has support. And so it's interesting to watch this play out because you have, you effectively could have what is a war among the deep state in Brazil. And we're seeing like a little bit of that in front of our eyes right now. The PRF, as the Highway Police Patrol is known, had already faced accusations of attempting to suppress the votes of Da Silva supporters during Sunday's election when it stopped and investigated hundreds of public buses carrying voters to the polls in defiance of an order from Brazil's top electoral court. It was unclear as of Tuesday evening how Bolsonaro supporters would react to his concession. Polls conducted this year found that a sizable segment of his base did not want him to accept the results of a defeat, but they also suggested that aside from his most hardcore backers, there was little appetite, even among Bolsonaro supporters, for a drastic attempt at a democratic rupture in such a scenario. This is exactly like the Trump base in the U.S., about half the Republican Party. Similar thing going on in Brazil here. Again, it is true, there were widespread reports and a lot of evidence of voter suppression by Bolsonaro against Lula supporters. And so you had, again, won by 2 million votes, about 2 percentage points. But how big would that victory have been if there wasn't voter suppression efforts? 3%? 4%? I can only guess here, right? But look, I have to say, all things considered, the fact that he didn't go full Donald Trump, I think that's a good thing. I mean, I know he did this sort of weaselly middle ground move, and he didn't try to quell the protests, but I really think this is the best case scenario we could have hoped for, given everything he said before the election, which indicated, like, I'm going to go full stop the steal, rigged election, Donald Trump type stuff. So, I mean, I guess kind of a victory, but, let me bite my tongue because you never know what's going to happen moving forward. You never know what's going to happen moving forward. So, Jair Bolsonaro finally breaks his silence. Crystal made a good point about this to me, too. Like, if you're going to go with a rigged election narrative, you got to be out there from, when the election is happening, the second it's over, you got to be hammering away on your narrative, pointing out things that you think are, anomalies, some inconsistencies. You got to build that narrative, build that argument. And that's what Trump and his sycophants have done so well, is they have their little talking points, which are shitty and can be easily debunked, but they believe it because they don't know any of the counter-arguments or care about any of the counter-arguments. And they built this narrative that, well, of course it was stolen. For example, we had the Red Mirage scenario in the U.S., which you guys remember because we talk about it all the time. It was this idea that they count the votes from Election Day first, and more Republicans vote on Election Day. And they count the mail-in ballots second, and the mail-in ballots are heavily Democratic biased. And so it looked like Trump built a huge lead, and then it all went away by the morning. And so they used, what do you mean? Trump was up, and then in the middle of the night it flipped, and obviously that's sketchy. And, so they were building that narrative. Now, it was a similar thing because the pro-Bolsonaro areas came in first, right, in this election. And then Lula's came in second, and he ended up making up the difference and ended up winning, right? But, you didn't see that much of the building the narrative going on here. And so when he was silent for 48 hours, that was like, hey, if you're trying to do is stop the steal shit, you're being a little bit inefficient in that process. So best we could have hoped for to this point, but, we still never know what's going to happen moving forward. I guess we'll see. If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal, Kyle, and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take 0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.